About time we discussed a reputable educational establishment. Inkblot Art Academy Clam Blitz has been chosen by my Patreon supporters as the map mode of the day for today. If you would like input on which map mode I do next, you can support me in my Patreon. You can see the link in the description of the YouTube video here. Even if you don't have the finances to support me that way, you're still doing a huge solid to the channel by giving a like, subscribing to the channel, hitting the bell, leaving a comment, all that good stuff. So really appreciate all y'all too. Let's get on with it. Inkblot Clams is a pretty popular competitive map mode. It's a really interesting map because there are really very few ways into the enemy basket, but because it's so challenging to control the enormous size of mid here, it still typically plays fairly slowly. Usually winning one fight in mid isn't enough to get you up into the basket. There's just so much that you have to control. There are so many separate fights going on in these separate locations that a lot of the time the way that you're going to advance is not by winning a fight and then just scoring. You're going to win a fight, you're going to get control of mid first, and then with this advantage that you have from controlling mid, it is then that you're going to start staging a push onto the enemy base. It's a very interesting concept, and I think one of the reasons that this map works as well as it does is that unlike a map like Walleye Warehouse, which does also have this concept where mid is a lot bigger than the rest of the map is, you're really close to the middle of the map, even from spawn. It doesn't take you a super long time to get out to the middle of the map, and you have multiple ways of doing that, which you wouldn't have in a really closed-off, narrow map like Walleye. So, even though this is another map that has a much bigger mid area that's a lot more interesting to play around than there is on a map like Walleye, here there are so many ways back out, and it's relatively quick to get back out, so a lockout of the enemy spawn isn't the most common thing, at least on this map mode. For those who may not have seen the videos before, the objective line is the line that shows how your team progresses through the map as they gain more and more control. If you're on this point in the objective line, that means that your team controls this radius around it, and so all of this area around it is controlled, that is, the enemy cannot safely approach that zone of the map. And in order to reach the basket, your zone of control needs to extend around the basket, like so. Now, this is, of course, a very simple objective line, but what really becomes interesting about it is when you look at what kind of a radius you have to control to get from one point on the line to another. Just like in Piranha Pit, this is a very simple objective line, but it has some pretty wide-reaching implications once you consider that. At your basket, you only really have to control this much. It's not a huge chunk of the map. It is relatively wide. You do have to be worried about things being up here as well as someone being down here. Those two at the same time can be a pain to deal with. And it is possible for the enemy team to get up into your base like this. So this area, I'm not just drawing the line there because I'm trying to extend it across the map. That is actually an area that you will need control of if you're going to defend your basket here. But still relatively doable. You have a whole lot of high ground up here. You've got high ground above that high ground here. You've got high ground above this area here if you need it. So the map is designed to give you an advantage over those positions, even though there are, more positions you might have to cover than on a narrower map. But now let's talk about what happens if you get into mid. As soon as you drop into mid here, we're talking about all of this. It's a pretty wide radius. And if you want to get all the way and start controlling mid, we're talking about something like this that you need control of. This is a really huge chunk of space, and this kind of explains why this map is relatively slow moving, even though the distance between the baskets is one of the shortest in the entire game. When you move into mid, in order to really have control of mid, we're talking about painting from like all the way over here to about all the way over here. We want to make sure we know where somebody is in all of this space. And so since the map is so wide and controlling it like that takes so much time, the amount of time it takes your team to push from here to here is actually pretty substantial. There are going to be some pretty major fights that happen especially around these two stacks as you push forward. And it is only really once the enemy team is locked onto their plat, which is this area right here, it is only then that you're really going to start looking for a major scoring push that you can expect to sustain for any amount of time. In order to get into the basket once you have map control, we're talking about 3 possible ways of getting there, and it really is just about 3. In theory, there is a 4th, but that's really impractical for the purposes of scoring most of the time. We'll talk about that though. So, first and probably most obvious route is to go up here. There is a nice little stair step that they give you to be able to get up this platform. Now, this is the fast break option. It is by far the fastest way to get to the basket. It is also by far the least safe. For one thing, you have to do 2 short jumps. And while that may not seem like much if you're just going in recon mode and trying it out yourself, when you actually try this in a match and people are shooting at you, it can go really badly really quickly. All it takes is enemy ink at your feet for you to not be able to make the jump up. As soon as enemy ink is at your feet, your jump height is shortened and you are not able to move higher. So you do actually need to paint your feet before you go for the next jump a lot of the time, and that costs a lot of time, especially if they see you as soon as you made the first jump. In order to get a power clam in, you can't just be standing on this box, you actually have to get all the way up onto the platform. These little bumps that they put next to clam baskets, they tend to be an indicator of the furthest distance away that you can throw a power clam in. That's kind of a rough rule of thumb that you can use. So you need to get up onto here, and then you need to get up onto here, and then you need to step just a little bit further forward, and then you can throw it. Now, you might be able to stand like here and make yourself a smaller target, because part of this bump shields you, but that's not a super reliable method, especially if people are just throwing bombs out here, which is what they should be doing. This also gives you no cover whatsoever against a player who's standing up here and just right peeking down over the ledge through the grates. This is an extremely powerful defensive position. This is something the backline players love using. So there's a lot that's going to be staring you in the face from dangerous positions, even from different angles, as you try to hop up over here. You're only going to try and hop up over there if you can brute force it, if nobody's looking at you, something like that. Another option that you have is if you climb up this wall and get up over the top into the enemy plat this way. This is one option. I kind of consider it the same as this option here, where you walk up the ramp. They're not that different, and the difference in whether you choose to do one or the other is, are you on more of a fast break, or are you needing to play a little bit more careful? Being on this position is very disadvantageous. You are on low ground and it's unpaintable, but you can play a little bit stealthy from there sometimes. If you go like Squid form right here and just slowly move yourself up, they're not going to see you over this ledge for a little while, and so that can be one way that you can sneak up. It's a lot less visible going this way, and so if you're trying to be stealthy about it, you might want to try that. If you're trying to be fast about it, you might want to try going up over here. But either way, you're going to end up in about the same spot here, and you're going to be rushing the basket either from here, if you're trying to get there as fast as possible, or hugging this wall if there are people above you, but nobody in front of you, and you need to use the wall here to shield yourself from the players above. One other way, which is a little bit less common, but which is a pretty strong play if you're a flanker weapon, maybe something like what I called the rat weapons in my weapon roles list, is to go up this wall and then come all the way up and get behind the basket. This position right here there are very limited windows for the enemy team to stop this. They need to first see you as you're coming up over the top of the wall, maybe around here, because if they don't see you then, they're probably not going to see you as you maneuver your way around in this direction, since this wall right here, this ramp and everything, is hiding you from view. And really the only way that you're going to just get caught red-handed doing this is if someone happens to be dropping down from spawn at that same time and sees you there. Relatively unlikely thing to happen, and especially less likely if you're checking the heads-up display. Big advantage of this is that you can often just sit in a corner like this, be very shielded from the enemy team. You're shielded from here, you're shielded from this angle, so it's only someone right here or someone who's like here and looking backwards that can really do much about you. Even if the enemy team were to like drop here and then suddenly realize, oh, someone's scoring and try to come back, now you've got right peak advantage on them over this ramp. And so even then it would be disadvantageous. So it's really only if somebody's coming out from spawn that they're going to have a good sight line on you. Yeah, they may see you earlier if they're checking their map well, but can they actually get back and stop you? That's a different question. A lot of the time, if a player's out here and they recognize that that's happening, the only thing they can do to stop this player is to super jump back to spawn and then go all the way back out in a direction like this or in a direction like this. That's extremely time consuming. That's a good 5 or 6 seconds. And that's a lot of clams that you can score in that time. It's a lot of time you can give your teammates to jump into you and start locking out from here. If you're going to try and play the jump a power clam strategy, this is the location you're probably hoping for. Either this, or if somebody is able to sneak onto Plat, then yeah, okay, go for it, but they're a lot less likely to be able to sneak onto Plat than they are to be able to sneak into this hidey hole here in the corner. If you are looking for one of those plays, if that's all you need to get lead, then that's where you're looking for it from. Now, again, I would like to discourage players from exclusively making this their strategy. Just running to the basket with the brush held down and this way spamming for your team to jump to you is not always the right play. In fact, it often isn't. You are putting your team at a 3v4 for a significant amount of time while you're going for that, so that makes it more likely that the other team is going to be able to track your team down, get splats, maybe prevent them from getting clams that they need to make a power clam. If your team doesn't have a power clam yet, absolutely never go for this, because what guarantee do you have that they're going to be able to make one in time? Also, in solo queue, you're relying on players to actually respond to it this way, which doesn't usually happen any lower than S+. Even S+ is usually a crapshoot whether somebody actually spots this and goes for it. Finally, and the real reason that you don't see this very often in competitive play, is that at a relatively high level, what's going to happen is people are going to see this power clam icon that's back here because the player is holding it. And as soon as that starts moving, strong players are keeping tabs on where this is moving on their peripheral vision, on their screen. And when they see that it's changing at this angle, by about right here, they already know that it's super jumping, and they can project pretty well, okay, that's going to land somewhere in this area right here. And so they're going to turn around and they're going to start looking for that. As soon as that goes airborne, you're going to have players from mid already super jumping back. And if somebody is in position to actually spot where this jump is landing, what happens is the power clam probably makes it in. But then both players, the person being jumped to and the power clam holder, get splatted. And now the rest of the rest of your team, they probably don't have mid control. Because remember, you've put them in a 3v4 to go and make this play. So you get your power clam in, 2 of you get splatted, and now it's a 2v4 situation where your team is pushed further back in mid. There's almost no shot that any more clams get put in the basket after a play like this if it's being defended well by, a strong competitive level or X-rank player. As soon as this play goes off, you throw 1 power clam in, and you think, okay, well, we still got a power clam, that's still points. Here's the thing about that. In Clam Blitz, you actually sometimes don't benefit from scoring. That sounds crazy, but hear me out. If you're at 100 to 100, you score 1 power clam, and nothing else even goes in the basket. What's going to happen is now your team is at a score of 80 with a penalty of 10. So you have this 20-point lead, a lead which is beaten by just barely more than the actual minimum that the other team can possibly score. Okay? If they score just a power clam, okay, sure, they're going to get rounded up to 81, and you're going to win the tiebreaker. But that is the only push that your score beats. And what you've done by making that push is given the other team a pity clam. Pity clams are more powerful than power clams. A pity clam doesn't have to be picked up in order for it to stay alive, and it will stay alive indefinitely. It won't break like any other power clam will, or even like the pity clam will as soon as it's picked up and thrown. If the other team just leaves the pity clam sitting there under their basket, they can make a push completely without using that pity clam. You know, make their own power clam in mid, or make it ideally right when they get to the basket. Form it, throw it in, and as soon as the defense splats one player, that player goes back to spawn, can pick up the pity clam, and they can super jump that pity clam in anytime they want to just add another random 20 points to any given push. While you have technically taken the lead, it is not a lead that is very likely to stand, and it is a lead that is threatened more heavily now because you've just given the other team another 20 points of scoring potential on top of whatever they were already carrying. Usually in competitive play, you only say that a push is worthwhile if it gets down to at least 60 or so. At that point, 2 power clams are what it takes to equalize from the other side, and so that's the equivalent of them making a power clam in mid and jumping in the pity clam and scoring that much. And that's about the rough mark where you say, all right, that push was worth it, we had enough follow-up. The real way to play the objective in Clam Blitz is you play to keep the basket open. It doesn't matter how fast you score, as long as the basket just doesn't close. So you advance your team along the objective line to the point where you're at the enemy basket and you're enforcing control of that area. And then from here, you change the game to a game of splat zones. Let me explain. In splat zones, remember, there is a hot zone. There is an area around which scoring can take place, and you play to keep the enemy team out of this hot zone. If you can keep the enemy team out of this hot zone while you've got the basket open, it is possible to have one player running back and forth and getting more clams, have their teammates in the meantime throwing in 1 clam at a time, slowly. It's important to do it slowly so that you're resetting as much of the timer as you can with the resources that you have, and to whittle down the score by maintaining control around the basket for as long as you possibly can. Once you start to lose control of the basket, it's more important to keep yourself alive than it is to suicide for 1 or 2 more clams, unless you are actually very close to lead. Because what happens a lot of the time in Clam Blitz is everybody gets right up to the basket and just all scores at the same time. And what's going to happen then is you're going to get all of the points that your team currently has on their person to score, but nobody is enforcing this zone. Nobody is stopping the enemy team from getting to the scoring players. And scoring players are looking at the basket. They're not looking around them. They don't have their aim set for the places they're likely to be attacked from. They're very unlikely, if you're just spam throwing clams, to do anything about somebody who's trying to splat you, and so a lot of the time they get splatted before they've dropped their whole payload into the basket. If instead you have one player scoring and the others are protecting them while they score, you're more likely to actually stop the defenders from getting there, maybe even get some more picks. And as this player scores, they reset the basket and give more time for someone else to drop back and get more clams and bring more clams in. And then, once they are out of clams, what are they going to do? Well, probably try and protect the players who are scoring clams. And so now this player who was on bodyguard duty switches to scoring on the basket while this player protects them. And that keeps the basket open for twice as long as if this player and this player had been scoring at the same time, as well as making sure that the scoring push is actually somewhat safe. That extra time that you buy for your players to drop back and get more clams often leads to them being able to score even more. You score more clams on a push like this than you even carried to the basket with you, because you're buying yourself enough time to go back and get more scoring resources and to put more in the basket then. This is the way that Clam Blitz is played at a high level. It's something that you are unlikely to see until you get to much higher levels of X rank, but it's something that even if you don't have teammates that are perfectly cooperating to pull this off, you can still do this yourself a little bit. You, for instance, if you are the only player who has clams to score, can slow down your clam throws and give your teammates time to get more clams and try and keep the basket open. If you are on the basket during a scoring push and you don't have clams, you can either make the executive decision, do we need to defend the clam throwers or do we need to go back and get more clams? And you can play according to this formula to the fullest extent that your teammates will allow you to. Now, that's not to say that if you do see a player who is in the enemy base in a safe position this waying, that you don't just super jump a power clam into them. That can still be the right play. It depends on what the score is between you and the enemy team, and what you think the rest of your team, who you're leaving behind for the super jump, will be able to do to contribute. What might work is to just jump the entire team in with the power clam. As long as the enemy team doesn't score on the temporarily undefended basket, if you get everybody in there and one has a power clam and the rest of them have a bunch of clams, maybe that's the right play. And maybe that makes it a lot more difficult for the enemy team to defend it because they have to super jump back and try and get one of those angles. There are definitely some cases where it pays a lot to pay attention to somebody who's this waying in a position like this. But at a higher level, for one thing, players are going to be on the lookout for this play. They're going to be checking in this area to see this player coming in, and this player is a lot more likely to get splatted before anybody is able to get super jumps to them. And also, even if they do miss something, players are going to catch the arc of the super jump, and they're going to be there waiting to stop the push and prevent much more than a power clam from going in. So look more often for the kind of play where you're going to be able to slowly take map control across the map, and then once you've got the enemy team bottled up in this area right here, you pop a bunch of specials, one after the other, absolutely bombard them with bombs, take away all the space that they can stand on, probably get some picks in the meantime, and then you have a nice, easy path to the basket so you can start one of these really powerful 0 to KO slow pushes. Weapon rolls. This map is oddly diverse in terms of what can work here. You do see a lot of long range weapons despite how short the map is, because you have really good sight lines from positions like Plat here to see out over a pretty significant amount of the map. Also, on offense, if a backline takes a position like here or here, that does actually gives them some vision over the enemy Plat here, and that can be really dangerous and can also help attacking players get up over the top of the wall, get around here with safety, or get through here while they have backup from behind. We'll start as we usually do with the Slayer and Skirmisher weapons. Slayers and Skirmishers, you have your work cut out for you on this map because controlling all of this is a pretty big challenge. Usually what you're going to want to do is play around one of these stacks. Those are the usual points that you're going to try and control to be able to extend map control across for your team. Realistically, with your objective line, it's going to be something more like this, or like this, you're going to get control of first one stack and then another a lot of the time, at least as an individual focusing on the map. As the team as a whole, you probably do have at least one person keeping an eye on one side and then another side. But usually, even in competitive play, you're going to see players try to overwhelm one side and use that as a staging ground to take the other side. Because if you don't control either of these areas, you don't really have great approach options to the other one. Because the first one is going to have vision on you, and somebody from that side is going to pinch you. But as soon as you take control of one of them, so let's say we have control of this stack right here on top, if enemy players from the other stack try to approach from an angle like this, you have people from this side that can see them and people from here that can see them, and they get pinched in mid and forced backwards. So as a team, you generally want to get control of these, and that is what really determines whether you have control of mid. Now, you still do have to be careful with a position like this, that you're paying attention to this location from the enemy spawn. Players do just have uncontestable, or very difficult to contest, I should say, access to tree, this area right here, from their spawn. I'll show it on our side because it's easier to see from the perspective. You can just drop from spawn, come down here, and drop off either onto here or onto here, and you have access to stacks from that location in addition to being able to see it from here. So even if the enemy team has both stacks, if you drop someone out of this side and are able to put some pressure on from the front on the left, then you might still be able to retake the left side for this team stack. This is a very visible drop. It's something that you need to be a little bit careful about if you're going to go for this as something like a frontline weapon, because they're either going to see when you drop down from this angle because you're just very visible the whole way down, or if you drop off on the other side, they're going to see the paint that you're going to be putting down on your way in over here. And since you're going to be taking a pretty good long time in painting that to be able to get out into a position that matters, they're probably going to spot that, even if they didn't spot you physically before you started painting there. So this is pretty visible. Don't expect that this is necessarily the sneakiest thing you can do. About the most you're going to be able to do with that position is if you're something like a bucket or a roller, you hide alongside this wall, wait for someone to come out in this direction, and then slap them with the roller over the top, or, you know, hit them with the bucket or whatever. That's about the sneakiest play that ever happens from there. Otherwise, you're kind of just pushing in from a relatively visible position and expecting that your team is ready to defend you from an off angle when you do that. Pushing in right here by yourself is a pretty low percentage play because you're putting yourself at low ground. You just don't have a lot of advantages. There's not a lot of cover even. Like, yes, you can hide yourself behind this wall and, you know, you can get back in this direction and maybe do something from that. But in terms of cover you can actually use to fight with, you really don't have a lot there. The most you're going to be able to do is, again, use a weapon that can hit up over ledges. Meanwhile, the enemy team, if they're defending against you pushing from here, they've got this, which gives them high ground. They've got this corner, which is more exposed, but still gives them high ground. They've got the whole stack that they could be sharking on. They could be sharking on the back wall. They could be standing on this middle tier somewhere right here and sharking in that. They could be sharking on the wall between the middle tier and the top. Or they could be all the way on top. And having high ground on these stacks not only gives you cover, but it also gives you a wider range of angles that you can attack from. If you're on the very top here, you can attack anyone who's directly around you. If you're on the second tier, okay, you can't aim in this direction, obviously, but you still have this whole semicircle around you that you can control. If you're underneath the stack, though, that narrows it down to maybe just this box. Or if you're on this side, it narrows it down to about this box around you that you can hit. Or if you're right here, you can only really hit in this direction. Seriously limiting to be underneath the cover as opposed to being on top of the cover. Sure, it's a little bit less safe, it's a little bit more exposed this way, maybe you want the cover. But being able to drop down in any direction is a powerful advantage, and it's something that you need to respect as you approach these stacks. You need to know that you're not sure where an opponent is if all of this is painted up, and they could come at you from here, they could come at you from here, they could come at you from down and around this corner. You have a lot of different options that you need to be careful about that the opponent could use to just drop on you and try and get a pick from. So pushing from here, like I said, you want to do that as a set play where the team is pushing in and you're pushing in with them to try and gain control of this space at the same time. Solo pushes from here are a lot less likely to succeed. This piece of cover right here is useful if you're trying to traverse mid quickly, but I would not try and just post up and stay there unless you have a lot of range, because this is a pretty vulnerable position to attack. Yes, from the front, it'll protect you pretty well. But remember, the goal in getting control of mid is to get control of one of these stacks. As soon as you have control of one of these stacks, you can flank this position from either side and completely flush anybody out of this position. Yes, okay, maybe that person tries to hide here, but this puts them in direct line of sight of anybody with range who happens to be looking from plat. So that's usually not a position that's ever going to be safe. So getting either this angle or this angle on that piece of cover is all you really need to flush them away from it and force them usually to retreat to the other side stack. Once you get on offense, you're expecting that this team is bottled up in this area here. At this point, you need multiple angles of approach. It just doesn't work for everybody to run all in one direction. You've got to have at least someone putting pressure on here and someone putting pressure over here. Going up here is situational, depends on whether it's safe to go for that. A lot of the time, if the enemy team is backed up so far, the time has already passed where you could safely get up here and make your way around. Because usually, even if they weren't expecting you to go up this way, there's probably someone here anyway trying to defend against this. And so they'll just see you and turn their attention to you instead. That can be a good thing. It can actually help to distract the enemy team by giving them another angle they have to look at. I'm not saying it's a terrible thing to go up in this direction, but it's also something where you're vulnerable for the entire time from when you're on the wall and across to here. It's only once you get to about this location that you have any cover at all. And even if you're just climbing the wall and you're waiting and sharking on the wall, waiting to pop up, somebody who takes this position as the defending team still can shoot you in the back as you're trying to climb up the wall. So unless there's already pressure coming from elsewhere that they have to deal with, you might still not be safe even while you're still on the wall. So usually you're looking at somebody coming over here and somebody coming over here. And that's a pretty good pinch because players are generally going to take maybe this position or this position, and they can't look both places at once. They can't split their attention that badly. If you both come in at the same time and time that right, you're going to have an opportunity. Someone on your team is going to have an opportunity to shoot a player who is just not aware of their presence or not able to deal with them at that moment. Missiles are so nasty if the enemy team has dropped down onto here because they want to be able to back up. You're putting enough pressure on them that this area right here is not safe, and then missiles land here and here and here, and there are only so many places they can run. If your teammates fire missiles in this kind of a position, throw a bomb here, take away even more space. Try to paint their feet, try to get them stuck. A special like that, a special like Booyah, a special like Bubbles, a special like Rain, all of those can be really powerful for just straight up getting splats because they have nowhere to retreat to. You might force some people back into here, and this is just an absolute shooting gallery. This area is unpaintable and there's no cover, and there's no way to get out of it either except for straight forward through where the enemy team is most likely to be looking at that moment at the basket. Usually if you get backed up into here, unless you've got range on someone who's trying to come around this corner, just jump out. There's nothing else you're going to be able to do. The stronger defensive position, and the one that at lower level people give up too much, is being up above the basket on this terrain here. And maybe here as well, depending on the weapon. Some weapons can't take advantage of this as well because they don't have the range to, but these defensive positions highlighted in red are actually excellent. And if the enemy team is being disciplined and staying in positions like this and this and this, let's say, those are a lot more difficult to dislodge. Those take a lot more surgical precision to displace someone from. Because this player can just drop down here and you have no line of sight on them whatsoever. You have no idea where they went. This player can just duck behind this piece of cover here, and they have plenty of room to back up if you're trying to throw bombs behind there, so it's not like you're going to be able to get them stuck or anything. This player can just back further up, and they're completely invisible to you. So they have ways out. You can't just flush them out of their positions, and they have high ground where they can take shots at whoever from wherever they want. What a good team is going to do is, as soon as they realize they're at a disadvantage, as soon as they get splatted and they're respawning in, they're going to immediately move to one of these positions, as long as nobody's up here threatening this one, and they're going to paint for specials, and they're going to keep a whole bunch of bombs right in this area here. From a position like this, they can watch this angle with their main weapon, and they can keep bombs on this area, which makes it unsafe for clam throwers to get up into a position where they can actually afford to try and score on the basket. Two players staggering bombs on this position right here, you will get a lot of picks from overzealous players who are like, I gotta get up, I gotta get up, I gotta jump up the steps, I gotta go score, oh shoot, there's a bomb there. Throw lots and lots of bombs. I personally would say that after Rainmaker, Clan Blitz is the second most important mode to have lethal bombs, because you can just put bombs in one very predictable location and prevent the enemy team from scoring, even if they have an advantage. Once a push starts falling apart, once you don't have the numbers, maybe you run out of clams, always be willing, no matter which weapon you are, even if you're the Slayer and Skirmisher, the weapon that its job is to push the objective line forward, be ready to drop back into mid. Be ready to just leave and abandon ship and maybe give your team jumps back in and try and maintain a little bit of map control. Because if you go down, then the enemy team is already up to here. If you don't go down, they can't approach these quite as safely. They have to kind of poke their way in around them. You're probably going to be able to at least maintain one of the stacks or something of that nature if you just keep yourself alive and stay in there. You're going to be able to paint up as you come in from this position. You're going to keep your special charge so that when your teammates come back, instead of everyone having been wiped and everyone having to rebuild their specials again, you already have one or two to get yourselves back in and maybe win the fight over mid. And then you're going to be able to just get back to this position a lot faster. Supports. The support's role in Clan Blitz is a lot more fluid than in some other maps. You're not just the pack mule. You're not just, well, I carry Rainmaker, I ride tower, I paint zone. Because really anyone is perfectly capable of making a scoring push, and in an ideal situation, nobody is really carrying a power clam until you actually get close to the basket. That's not how it's going to work in practice a lot of the time, but what you really want to be doing is picking up 9 clams. And once you have 9 clams, and maybe your other teammate has 9 clams, as soon as you get to the basket, all it takes is one player throwing one clam to the other, and you've got a power clam. And that power clam was not revealing you the entire time that you made it here and tried to come over here and fight over this direction, and then moved it over here, and then got shot at and backed up and then went forward again. All of that time, you being revealed is a huge liability to the team. It makes it a lot more likely that you get picked by somebody who's sharking because they know where you are and you don't know where they are. If instead you just keep the 9 clams and hop up and over to here, one clam thrown from one player to another is all it's going to take. Or even one clam dropped from a splatted player on plat is all it's going to take for you to be able to score. And that entire time you maintain your stealth much, much better. So consider just not even making a power clam until the very end there. And, you know, if you happen to be the player who doesn't have as many clams as your teammate, throw clams at your teammate. And that's a pretty surefire way for you to be able to make one, even in solo queue when they don't know about this strategy of throwing clams to each other. Another important thing that a lot of players don't think about is that for the same reason, you don't want to pick up the pity clam right away. The only time that you do want to pick up the pity clam is if you want extra scoring power right now and the enemy team has just broken your basket and you still have a pity clam down there. If you get a successful defense, the enemy team is out of this position, and you've already got a pity clam as the timer is ticking down on when your basket is going to close. If you pick up this pity clam, now you have a power clam plus another pity clam is going to drop. If you don't pick up that pity clam, you don't get a second one. A second one isn't going to spawn next to the first one or anything like that. You waste that opportunity to get a free pity clam. So, depending on the situation, you might want to pick it up. Even then, consider not picking it up, because again, that power clam is going to reveal you for the entire time that you're carrying it. That's a huge combat disadvantage. That's basically going to force you to play like a backliner. Maybe if you're like a junior player and your whole game plan is spam bombs and paint for armor, that's an acceptable situation for you. But for most players, it shouldn't be. And even for a junior player, I hesitate to recommend that sort of playstyle. Really think twice about whether you actually want to make that power clam or whether you want the 9 individual clams. Because there are some other huge advantages that you get from only having individual clams. One of those is that you're able to stall the basket a lot better. Like we said, it's so important at a high level to keep the basket open. If you throw your power clam, yeah, that's a lot of points all at once, but it's all at once. It's not gradually over time. And gradually over time is what will reset the timer on the basket and keep it open for longer. With 9 individual clams, you can, in theory, keep the basket open for an extra, I want to say 27 seconds? Because it resets for 3 seconds every time. That's a huge amount of time for one player to theoretically be able to reset the basket. Realistically, you're probably just going to throw a whole bunch of those in at once. But as you do that, realize you're also scoring more than a power clam does. It's simple math. Power clam scores 20. 9 clams that score 3 points each, that's 27. That's more points. So if you are able to control the basket like it's Splat zones, you don't need the fast burst scoring that a power clam gives you. You actually get more out of the individual clams. One last huge advantage of individual clams that matters especially on this map is that you can throw them further than you can throw the power clam. Remember how we were talking about, I was saying you have to be about here to be able to score a power clam on the podium? Well, that's a power clam. Individual clams, you can just stand here, jump, and throw a clam in, and stay on this step a little bit lower. You have more cover, you're throwing from further away, it's harder for them to dislodge you, and you can still throw those individual clams from this defended position. So, hopefully I've convinced you that the individual clams strategy is actually a really good one. One other small thing to think about for optimizing your clam blitz play. When clams spawn in pods of 4, so it'll look something like this. If you pick up all 4 of those clams, eventually that pod is going to respawn with 4 new clams. But if you pick up all but one of them, that pod is still technically there because not all of them have been picked up. It's not going to refresh the clams that are around it. You can actually do a little bit to manipulate which pods of clams are active on the map. And if you think about it, you want the pods on your side of the map to be less active because those pods are the ones that the opponents are going to try and use as they're pushing into the basket to get more clams. If the opponents score on you and they come back here and they find 4 clams, that's an extra 12 seconds that they can keep the basket open. But if they come back here and only find 1 clam, that's not worth the time that they spent leaving the basket. It took them more than 3 seconds to come back and get this 1 clam that's only going to get them 3 more seconds on the basket. So what high-level teams will do is they'll actually take 3 clams out of a pod that is near their basket and make sure that the clams don't refresh from there as quickly and that the opponent has less scoring potential around the enemy team's basket. Backline. As a backliner, you have a lot of this semi-uncontestable high ground. There really isn't any high ground in Inkblot that is completely inaccessible to the enemy team, and that's important to remember. Even up here, you know, as unrealistic as this seems, something like a brush or a tetradulies, they can sometimes maybe get in here, climb up this wall, and go up this way, or they can also sometimes come up over here, get a couple of picks, jump across, and get up over here. So never think that you're completely safe in any of these defensive positions, but those are pretty unrealistic to expect players to go for most of the time. Until your team is getting locked the heck out of here, don't expect to see anybody in this kind of a location anytime soon. So really, you're usually going to be pretty safe being up here. This area is great because you can right side peek down through the grate and then just back up if you're ever in trouble and be around a corner. You can be up here. This gives you great high ground and the ability to see whatever else you want. You could even go for a jump onto this if that gives you a more favorable position against somebody, depending on your range and whatnot. Out here is a pretty good spot, so you can look down over this way and see enemy players. You can also spot somebody who tries to come up from this direction. If you don't think that there's anybody below you, it's great to take this position so you can see the wall really easily, and you can see anybody down here who's trying to approach. If you're getting super locked out, you also have the option to take this kind of a position. Still gives you right peek to anyone who's trying to score there, or on this location, which can be great for maybe spotting someone down here if they're in one of those jump positions. Then once you start moving up on the map, you've got some pretty good options. You can shoot from here, lets you kind of peek around this box, and you can play around the box on either side, of course, but playing from this side of the box keeps you safe from someone who's trying to push up here, because they have to push all the way around this corner, and you're probably seeing that coming at that point, giving yourself a little bit of a chance to back up. You can also play from this location here, lets you see this angle pretty well, and it lets you move up on top of the wall, or shoot from this angle, or do a number of different things. As your team starts claiming some control of mid, you have the option to play from here, or from here. The reason we say to play from here on this side, but from here on the second tier on this side, is right side peek advantage. From this angle, you're able to right side peek walking back and forth on this line, whereas from here, you're up on top, and you have no way to right side peek unless you're way down in the back corner. So if you're not going to be able to have covered right side peek from, might as well just be up on top and get better line of sight and more high ground over anybody who's trying to approach you. Like we said, this angle is great as long as there's no threat of a flank from one of the stacks. As soon as they have control of one of the stacks, you want to be very careful about taking that position. You want to be watching that. One other strong offensive position, if you're able to get there, is to take this location right here. From this location, it's very difficult for them to advance on you in any direction, because you can see them coming from over here. You can see anybody who's trying to come from Splat at you, and ideally at this point in time, your whole team has locked out the rest of the map here. So you're very unlikely to get flanked from anywhere. Anyone who's trying to come out this way, you're still going to see them before they get there. And the only other way to get to you at this point that you can't see is coming from like this direction, which is a very, very long high commitment flank. And even if they do go for that and completely succeed, all they're doing is taking you out of play, and they're not stopping any of the scoring from going through. So that's a really powerful position once you're able to take it, but that's sort of more of a lockout position. The only more aggressive position you're going to want to take as a backline player usually is maybe stepping forward a little bit to here, which gives you a lot of the same advantages, but also might let you target some stuff over here or maybe over here, depending on what range you've got. Key positions. As we've said, the battle over mid is fought over these stacks, and the only way that you're really going to care about this or this is how it influences your control over the stacks. The stacks are the best high ground, they're the best cover, they're the best concealment for what you're trying to do in mid, and controlling one of them basically has just given you half of mid completely. Once you have both of them, now you can say that you pretty safely have mid. You're probably going to need to, maybe mop up something that's going on in tree if that's going to threaten you. But for the most part, once you've got both of these under control, you're going to be able to start focusing on the basket. Like we said, there are 2 key positions that are the most common way you're going to get into the basket from. So these are going to be the most heavily defended. It's also extremely important as the defending team to always be watching this, and as the offensive team, consider going for this if you think you have an opportunity. Because as soon as somebody goes up here, the defense needs to be rotating someone over to a point where they have an advantage in this fight before this player gets around and gets into this cover. Because once they're in that cover, there's no telling what a short-range weapon can do with that. Plat is the danger zone. This is probably the single most dangerous place on the map. It's where probably the most picks happen on the map. If you are on the defending team and you don't necessarily have an advantage, dropping onto Plat is usually a mistake. You are able to defend the basket by standing in here, or here, or here, or here, or here, or here. All of those locations give you line of sight on all sorts of different places on your Plat, as long as you have just even the tiniest amount of range. And so giving up high ground, making yourself more visible, taking away your ability to back up and retreat from a disadvantageous fight, that often will lead to you getting rushed down and caught and cornered, and give the other team a much better opportunity to score than they would have had if you had stayed up top. So be very disciplined. Don't drop down over ledges without thinking about it carefully. Make sure that you're safe and that you probably have access to at least this much of the map before you're going to drop down, unless you need to drop down to help your teammate in a fight or something like that you're pretty sure you can win. Otherwise, you're liable to just get hit with bubbles, or to just get hit with missiles or bomb spam or something like that, and get forced backwards until you have nowhere left to go. It is worth noting on this map that if you do make the mistake of dropping down and you realize you don't want to be there, there is actually a sponge right here that the defending team can paint to get back up into this position, and that can absolutely save your life in situations where your team is at a disadvantage and you need to get back on defense and don't want to spend all of the time super jumping away. Main goals. The battle over mid is going to be a long one on this map a lot of the time. A lot of the time you might have a separate victories where one team wins this stack and one team wins this stack, and then they have to have a second battle over trying to control the second stack. Map control is kind of compartmentalized like that. And so until one team gets a pretty overwhelming majority of control of the map, you're probably not going to see a push just yet. Once you do get that kind of control, you're going to have a lot of paint down. Supports, as always, make sure that you are locking in that map control when you're able to get it so that it takes longer for the other team to regain it. Remember also that it's a huge advantage as the support to be painting the map so that when clams spawn on the map, you see them through walls. You see that little glowing circle on the screen, even if it's behind a wall and you wouldn't normally be able to see it. That's a huge advantage of painting the map, and so everybody should be painting the map, especially where clams are likely to spawn, so that they can spot those when they need to find them in scoring pushes. Once you have control of this, your goal is to get specials and get ready to stage an all-out offensive on the Plat. It's very important to coordinate this so that all of the players are rushing it at the same time. So as soon as you see a teammate pop a special and start trying to hop up, you hop up here and be ready with your own specials whenever it's going to be useful to use those to stagger those specials in and keep the bombardment going and give this player support from another side so they don't just get lasered down by somebody else, and just do whatever you can to amplify your teammates' offensive efforts as you get up onto the platform. And a reminder that in Clam Blitz, your main goal is to KO on a single push. Your goal is to keep the basket open for as long as possible. Once your push starts to fizzle out, once you're losing players, you're starting to lose map control, the defending players are starting to move in, cut your losses. 1 or 2 more clams, probably not worth it. Instead, back up and try and maintain the map control, because it's the map control that is really going to keep your team in the game. If you're able to at least control something like this, maybe control one of the stacks or the other, or even just have the area past this center pillow painted your color, that's going to slow the other team down a lot more, and you're much more likely to prevent a push at all that way, as opposed to, you know, you get 6 extra points, but then they get a massive push and are able to get their power clam in your basket. Usually those 6 points are worth less than the map control that you're giving up by getting splatted. So make a risk-reward assessment there. The only time I would suicide for a couple of extra clams is probably if that was actually going to make the difference between having lead and not making lead. Also, if you get a super jump opportunity, if you're going to take lead or like KO, can be worth it. If you're not going to do that, and you're probably just going to get splatted as soon as you land, consider maybe popping a special and trying to go in the front door. Maybe your teammate here gets a little frustrated as they spam this way at you and see that you're not going for it, but eventually they might, you know, get the idea to try and push from behind and flank in the same time that you're going in, or maybe something more is able to happen here. If you've got a player who's over here this wing and the enemy team is threatening to score on your basket, then it might be worth it to jump across and score to prevent this score from happening. But if you are maybe under attack and you don't have time, you might actually need to spam this way at your teammate to jump back to you. This is especially true if maybe your team doesn't have a power clam made yet, and you don't have a very easy way to make one before the enemy team is going to have threat on your basket. Sometimes saying, no, we can't, buddy, you've got it this way back to us, is actually the correct play, and sometimes that will convince this player not to be taking this position anymore. Hopefully that's given you a lot of food for thought on how to play Inkblot Clam Blitz. Like I said, this is a popular competitive map mode, and there's a reason for that. There's some complexity to it, there's some nuance. You have to fight really hard to be able to get mid control, and even then you still have to brute force your way into the basket, which is a challenge even then. So it's difficult to stage lockouts. It's difficult to completely stuff something that the enemy team is doing just by controlling one crucial choke point. Really is a pretty fair and balanced map that allows for a lot of different weapons to thrive. So hopefully you enjoy your time playing it as much as I do. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and a subscription. And also, if you really enjoy the series and want to support it going forward, would appreciate some support on Patreon. That's going to be it for me. Thank you everybody for watching. Hope you have a nice day.